Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Camelot. No, not King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. We're going to talk about JFK, or John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and his family, which was famously nicknamed Camelot during the 1960s because it seemed like this idyllic, beautiful family that all came together. And we're mainly going to talk about Kennedy today. When we talk about him, there's a lot to talk about: his life and his beliefs and his systems, but we're mainly going to talk about his ideas on civil rights. So today should be in your notes as JFK at home, 1960 to 1963. And if you've never seen him before, that's him right there. So, who is JFK? Well, he was a decorated naval veteran during World War II, and he comes from a very famous family. His dad, Joseph Kennedy, was ambassador to Great Britain during World War II. His brother, Joseph Jr., was killed tragically during World War II, and he was originally supposed to be kind of the heir to the Kennedy family. He was going to be the great one that leads them all and makes them, famous and becomes president of the United States. And once he dies, it kind of falls to this little sickly guy down here, JFK. He had something that was known as Addison's disease, and he struggled most of his life with back problems and being able to make weight and be strong enough to fight. And when he fought in World War II, his boat is actually sank, and he becomes a hero because he saves his other soldiers, and he goes on to write a book about it. And when he runs for Congress and he becomes a senator from Massachusetts, he writes this book called Profiles in Courage, which actually wins the Pulitzer Prize. So he was a very well-written, well-read president as well. And he becomes the first president born in the 20th century, which is important. He also was the youngest president we've ever had, even younger than Barack Obama in 2008. Now, in 1960, he wins probably the closest election in history, but he defeating this guy right over here. There, Richard Nixon. And if you remember, Richard Nixon was was Eisenhower's vice president and a very well-accomplished politician. He was from California. He had been vice president. He's an important figure in American politics. But Kennedy ends up beating him, even though he lacked the experience of Nixon and the national exposure. Kennedy overcame his obstacles and won by literally 100,000 votes. It's an incredibly razor-thin margin when you think about the large election and how many people vote every year. And he mainly wins this election due to television. See, in 1960, you have the first televised debates. Before that, it had always been at public squares, or you had radio debates. But for the first time, you see these public debates. And you start to see that Kennedy is young, and he's charismatic, and he's kind of good-looking, and he's well-spoken. And Richard Nixon, while very knowledgeable on the issues and a very smart politician, is not comfortable with being on TV. And so they'd put a lot of makeup on him to kind of even his skin tone out, so he looks very pale. The lights in the studio are hot, and so he's like sweating, and he looks uncomfortable and nervous, and people who are watching at home are thinking, this guy's bombing, he looks terrible. Whereas you look over at Kennedy, and he's tan, and he's good-looking, and they're thinking, this guy's got it. I like this guy. And what's funny is people who are actually listening on the radio hear it exactly opposite. They think Nixon won the debate, and Kennedy didn't sound like he knew what he was talking about at all. So it shows you the power of television. And most historians associate this election with those televised debates, and that's what gave Kennedy the leg up and helped him win. Now, once he becomes president of the United States, he has to do an inauguration. And his inauguration is a very famous speech, and I'm going to take a moment and let you listen to it here. It's only about 2 minutes, so it'll be a little long on this video, but it's a very important speech. Here it is.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
And so in that speech, Kennedy's famously saying, Americans, think about what you can do for yourselves and for your country. Put your country first. And citizens of the world, what can we do to make the world a better place? Rather than just saying, well, how is America going to help me today? Now, his foreign or his domestic policy becomes known as what's called the New Frontier. And the idea is that he's going to have all these social and political changes that are going to shape the nation from here on. And he also wants to shape the nation in not just in the United States itself, but around the world. He promises changes towards economic equality and civil rights, and some of the early civil rights legislation that we'll see when we talk about LBJ start in the New Frontier. Neat side story, actually. See the picture right over there? The guy on the far left is future President Bill Clinton. He'll be president in the 1990s. His wife is Hillary Clinton, who, at least the time of this video, is running for president of the United States. He famously got to meet JFK. And if you remember back to one of our earlier stories where I talked about Teddy Roosevelt seeing the casket of Abraham Lincoln, and we have that picture, this is one of those other times where we have a picture of one current president and one future president crossing paths and meeting each other. Very cool. Now, all these changes, they could have in fact happened throughout the Senate and the House of Representatives, but they're not really with Kennedy. And so many of these changes happen and they're originated through the Supreme Court, and mainly because of this man, Chief Justice Earl Warren. He pushes for a lot of changes that happen through the judicial system. Some of them are rights to counsel of accused criminals, which means you have the right to have a lawyer present even if you can't afford one. The state should have to give you one. The required police to read suspected criminals their rights. Those Miranda rights, if you've ever watched Law and Order before, you've seen as soon as they arrest somebody, they begin to read those rights to them. And they also begin to limit religion in school. Now, in the fall of 1963, as Kennedy is kind of thinking about running for election again, he's noticed then his losing popularity, particularly in the South because of his civil rights legislation in that New Frontier. The South is still very divided and is not really with Kennedy when it comes to the ideas of desegregation and of integration of schools. And so on November 22nd, 1963, he flies to Dallas, Texas to meet with local leaders and kind of mend fences and try to make things better. Now, tragically, that day, he is shot by a guy by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. And you can pause the video for a minute and just kind of see this is the layout of what's known as Dealey Plaza, the place where he was killed. He comes up Houston Street, goes down Elm Street, and he's killed in that building to the top left, known as the Texas School Book Depository by Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a communist defector and was somebody who had anti-American views and pro-communist, pro-Castro, pro-Soviet Union views. He's shot and he's killed and he dies at a nearby hospital, making LBJ the next president of the United States. Now, a few days later, Lee Harvey Oswald, while he's arrested and he's taken to jail, and he's going to be moved to a more secure place until trial. And while he's doing that, the film cameras are watching this live on TV. They're moving him from one car to another, and suddenly a man steps out of the crowd, a man by the name of Jack Ruby, and shoots Lee Harvey Oswald live on television and kills Lee Harvey Oswald. This leads to a host of conspiracy theories, and there'll be an investigation about the murder and everything else, and we could get into all that deepness in class if you'd like to, but mainly understand that at this time, not only is the president dead, but his assassin is dead, and we never truly hear the full story from Lee Harvey Oswald himself of why he killed the president. There's a national funeral for him, Kennedy lies in state, and it really ends what is known as the Camelot era. It's brief, and it impacts the nation. People really begin to see the world differently afterwards. There's this very famous photo of his son, JFK Jr., saluting his father as he passes. And this begins to see kind of seen as the death of innocence of the 1950s and 1960s. After this, everything's going to change. People are going to suddenly start seeing the world differently as maybe more of a dangerous place or a place that's maybe more feared. It's important to remember Kennedy's influence in the 1960s because while he doesn't get a lot of his civil rights agenda passed, his death will make him into a martyr and gives LBJ the ability to change things for the better. So while Kennedy is seen as such a successful president, his agenda really is laid out, but he doesn't achieve it, mainly because he's killed too soon. So make sure you have all of this in your notes. If you have any questions, please put them at the bottom of your notes. This is important, and we will talk about this much more in class. So if you're not sure on something, make sure you have that there. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.